So I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are standing in an airport terminal.
Okay, setting the scene. I like it.
Right, so you're there, and you are holding a one-way ticket to a city you've always wanted to live there. And it's for a job you've literally spent your entire life working toward.
The dream scenario.
Exactly, the absolute dream. Your bags are checked, the gate agent is calling your boarding group, and you just feel this electric hum of pure, unadulterated potential. Like, this is it, this is your moment.
Yeah, you're finally doing it.
But then your phone rings, and it's your family.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And there has been an emergency, a severe one. Like, not the kind of emergency that resolves in a week or a month, but the kind that is going to require years of constant, grueling, completely unglamorous caregiving.
And the derails everything.
Right. And in that split second, right there at the gate, you are faced with a choice that basically tears at the very fabric of human psychology. I mean, do you board the plane and, live your truth? Or do you turn around, walk straight out of the airport, and let your dream die so you can take care of your blood?
Man, that is the ultimate collision course of the human experience right there.
It really is.
And, modern culture has a very clear, very loud answer to that scenario. I mean, we have built an entire societal framework around the idea that personal fulfillment is just the highest possible good.
Oh, absolutely. The whole protect your peace mindset.
Exactly. If an obligation threatens your peace or your self-actualization, the culturally sanctioned advice is almost always, set a boundary, walk away, choose yourself.
Which brings us to the core of what we're doing today, because today we're exploring why a massive body of ancient philosophy, which is actually now being backed up by cutting-edge modern neuroscience.
Which is fascinating, by the way.
So fascinating. But all of this material suggests that the culturally sanctioned advice we just talked about might actually be destroying our mental health.
Yeah, it's a huge paradigm shift.
It is. So in this deep dive, we are getting into the profound, agonizing tension between personal happiness and the greater good. Like, what actually happens when the path of your personal joy directly collides with duty?
And to really unpack that, we've got an incredible set of sources today.
We do. We are using one of the most compelling case studies in human history, the ancient narrative of Lord Krishna and his ultimate love, Radha. And we're going to put their story under the microscope of clinical psychology, evolutionary biology, and of course, Vedic literature.
It's going to be a heavy one, but so relevant.
So let's jump in. Where do we even start with a conflict this massive?
Well, the premise we have to deconstruct first is how we even define the terms of this internal war.
Right.
In the Vedic tradition, which is the bedrock of the philosophical texts we're looking at today, this tension is conceptualized as a battle between Kama and Dharma.
Kama and Dharma.
Right. And these aren't just like dusty, archaic terms. They represent the two dominant operating systems of the human brain.
Let's break those down, because I feel like Kama, K-A-M-A,
Yeah.
right, it's often mistranslated as just like lust, which doesn't really capture the sheer scale of the concept from what I read.
Not at all. I mean, lust is a tiny fraction of it. Kama is essentially the pursuit of anything that brings the individual self joy or comfort or sensory pleasure.
So it's basically the modern dream.
Exactly. It's the drive for a beautiful home, romantic love, career success, a great meal, aesthetic beauty. I mean, it is the engine of the modern world. Kama is what we are all chasing when we ask ourselves that ultimate modern question, does this make me happy?
It's the gravitational pull of the self.
That's a great way to put it. And
Yeah.
the thing is, it's completely natural. The ancient texts don't condemn Kama. They don't say it's inherently evil. They acknowledge it as a fundamental biological and psychological reality.
Right, we're wired for it.
We are. But the friction arises because Kama operates in a vacuum of the individual, whereas Dharma, the other side of the coin, operates on the level of the ecosystem.
Okay, so define Dharma for me in this context.
So Dharma represents righteous action, cosmic order, and, your specific duty to the interwoven network of existence.
The interwoven network. I like that.
Yeah, it's the sobering recognition that you are not just a floating atom of desires. You are a load-bearing pillar in the lives of your family, your community, and arguably the universe at large.
Which perfectly sets up this incredibly vivid analogy from the text that I honestly haven't been able to stop thinking about since I read the sources.
The crossroads analogy.
Yes, the crossroads. So I want you to imagine you are standing at a literal crossroads in this dense primeval forest, and the path of Kama, the desire path, It is freshly paved.
Smooth blacktop.
Smooth blacktop, completely bathed in golden sunlight. The incline is perfectly flat, there are no obstacles whatsoever, and it promises immediate, tangible rewards at, every single milestone.
It's basically designed to be frictionless.
Entirely frictionless? But then you look at the other path, the path of Dharma.
And it is not paved.
No, it is a steep, jagged ascent. It's choked with roots, it's covered in shadow. And before you are even permitted to take your first step on this path, someone straps an incredibly heavy pack to your shoulders.
Like a 100-pound pack.
100-pound pack.
Yeah.
And you have to carry it the entire way. And here is the core friction of this entire deep dive, right here. Every algorithm on our phones, every self-help guru, every piece of modern marketing tells you that carrying the heavy pack is toxic.
Oh, 100%.
We are constantly told that choosing the steep path when a perfectly paved one is available is like a failure to love yourself.
Right.
Why would you suffer if you don't have to?
Because if the ultimate metric of a successful life is just minimizing pain and maximizing comfort, then the steep path is completely irrational. It makes no sense.
But ancient wisdom argues the exact opposite.
It does. Because what the texts suggest, and what we'll see modern neuroscience is actually beginning to corroborate, is that the paved path never actually leads to the summit.
It just loops around the base of the mountain.
Exactly. It's an endless loop. But the summit of the steep path offers a vantage point that the sunlit path physically cannot reach. When you haul that heavy pack of Dharma to the top, you gain perspective.
You look down and see what you built.
Right. You see the structure you maintained, the people you protected, the absolute chaos you managed to hold at bay. And that realization generates a deep structural sense of meaning that sensory pleasure is simply incapable of providing.
I mean, that is a massive philosophical concept, but I want to anchor it in a narrative that makes it visceral. Because abstractions, they only get us so far.
Sure, we need a human element.
And the emotional weight of this choice is crystallized so perfectly in the story of Krishna leaving Vrindavan.
Oh, this is such a powerful narrative.
It really is. So for those who aren't familiar with the intricacies of Vedic history, before Krishna was this massive geopolitical leader of an entire civilization, he lived an idyllic rural life in a village called Vrindavan.
And the texts describe this specific period of his life as the absolute unfiltered zenith of Kama.
Like the ultimate paradise.
Of a veritable paradise. He's depicted as this cowherd boy living in profound harmony with nature. His days are literally spent in aesthetic bliss, playing his bamboo flute in the forests, entirely insulated from the brutality of the broader world.
Just perfect, untroubled joy.
Yeah. And at the absolute epicenter of this paradise is his connection with the cowherd girls, the gopis, and specifically his supreme love, Radha.
And their dynamic, I mean, the way the sources describe it, it is a love so intense, so all-consuming that it transcends earthly boundaries. It is the ultimate romantic ideal.
It's his sunlit path playing out perfectly in real time.
But the heavy pack is coming.
The heavy pack is always coming.
Krishna's inherent dharma, his destiny, demands his presence elsewhere. He discovers that he has to leave this rural sanctuary and travel to the heavily fortified city of Mathura.
And the reasons are intense. He has to overthrow a tyrannical, violent dictator who, by the way, is actually his own uncle.
Right. And he has to free his biological parents, who have literally been rotting in a dungeon for decades.
And so just look at the sheer whiplash of that transition. He is being asked to trade a world composed entirely of music, devotion, and natural beauty for a world defined by political corruption, violent warfare, and the crushing administrative burden of statecraft.
It's unimaginable. And the texts detail the actual day of his departure. And it's a masterclass in human grief.
It's brutal to read.
So a chariot arrives, driven by a man named Akrura, to take Krishna to Mathura. And the entire village essentially breaks down. Like the gopis are weeping inconsolably. They are throwing their bodies onto the dirt roads, physically trying to block the wooden wheels of the chariot from turning.
Just absolute desperation.
Yes. And amidst all of this chaos, Radha is standing there. And what fascinates me most is the restraint in the narrative here.
How do you mean?
Well, Krishna doesn't deliver a soaring theatrical monologue about the necessity of cosmic duty. He doesn't try to intellectualize the moment to make it hurt less for her. He looks at her.
Because any attempt to verbally justify the departure would have cheapened it. There's this mutual devastating recognition in that silence. They both intimately understand that his physical presence is required to maintain the stability of the world, even if it completely shatters their personal universe.
That gave me chills, even if it shatters their personal universe. But before the chariot pulls away, there is this symbolic gesture that carries so much psychological weight. Krishna leaves his bamboo flute with Radha.
The flute is such a massive symbol here.
It is, because consider the anatomy of a flute. It's a hollow piece of wood. It has been entirely emptied of its core, emptied of its ego, which is exactly what allows the breath of the divine to flow through it and create music.
Right.
By handing her the flute, he is physically surrendering the instrument of his joy. He is basically saying, the music of my life, my personal happiness, it stays here in the forest with you, but my body must go to the battlefield.
And here's the kicker. He never plays that flute again.
Never again. For the rest of his eternal life.
He permanently retires his capacity for personal karma to take up the instruments of Dharma. And what he takes up in exchange for the flute is the Sudarshana chakra, which is this divine weapon that represents the enforcement of cosmic order.
So he trades the lightness of the bamboo for the sheer crushing density of absolute responsibility.
Exactly. He goes to Mathura. He assassinates the tyrant, he pulls his parents out of the dungeon, and then he spends the entirety of his remaining earthly existence wading through the darkest, most agonizing complexities of the human condition.
He becomes a king, a master diplomat, a strategist in a catastrophic world war.
He manages the suffering of millions. It is a deliberate walk away from the modern mandate of protecting your peace. He actively chooses to step into profound psychological and physical distress because he's the only one capable of bearing that specific weight.
I mean, I want you, the listener, to think about the magnitude of that trade in your own life. Like, identify your personal Vrindavan. What is the one thing that brings you the most profound, effortless joy?
It could be anything.
Right. Maybe it's your art studio, maybe it's a quiet morning routine with your partner, or a specific career path you just love. Now, imagine actively, permanently walking away from it, putting down your metaphorical flute, because you recognize that a system around you will collapse if you don't step into a role of heavy, stressful leadership.
It is terrifying.
It's so terrifying. And it brings up the most logical, persistent question that people ask when they hear this story. And I thought it too. If Krishna and Radha loved each other that much, why didn't he just take her with him?
Oh, yeah. That is the instinctual reaction of the modern mind. We look at two people in love, and our immediate structural solution is always marriage and cohabitation.
Right. Like, put her on the chariot, conquer the city, get married, and rule together. What's the problem?
But analyzing their dynamic through the lens of earthly marriage completely misunderstands the metaphysics of their connection.
Because marriage, at its absolute core, is a societal mechanism.
Exactly. When you strip away the romance and the flowers, an earthly marriage is a legal, cultural, and social contract. It's designed to take two entirely separate, autonomous individuals and bind them into a single functional unit so they can navigate society.
Like building a bridge between two distinct islands.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
But the theology explicitly states that Krishna and Radha are not two separate islands.
This is where the lore goes incredibly deep, because the texts define Radha as Krishna's Ladini Shakti.
Yes, Ladini Shakti.
Which is a concept that challenges literally everything we understand about individuality. Because Ladini Shakti translates to his own internal spiritual energy of bliss.
She isn't just a distinct woman who he happens to have romantic feelings for. She is the literal personification of his own capacity to love.
So they occupy two separate bodies in the material narrative, but they are fundamentally structurally one single soul.
Which renders the concept of marriage completely absurd in their context. I mean, you cannot marry your own soul.
That would make no sense.
Right. Attempting to validate a supreme cosmic integration with a human legal contract would be a profound downgrade. You would be taking a reality that transcends time and space and forcing it into a societal box meant for, like, tax purposes and property rights.
To explain this, there's a philosophical framework in the texts. Let me see if I can pronounce this right. Achintya, Bheda, Apeda.
You got it. Achintya, Bheda, Apeda.
Okay, awesome. And that roughly translates to inconceivable oneness and difference.
Yeah. It's the idea that two entities can be simultaneously identical and entirely distinct, which obviously makes the human brain short-circuit when trying to process it. So the ancient scholars relied on physics analogies to explain it.
The sun and the sunshine analogy is the one that really clicked for me.
It's brilliant.
So when you step outside and you feel the heat of the sun on your skin, you are interacting with the sunshine. Now, is that warmth the sun itself? In one sense, no. The sunshine is a distinct energy interacting with you millions of miles away from the celestial body.
But in another sense, absolutely yes. You cannot sever the light and heat from the star that generates it. They are fundamentally the exact same substance, merely operating in different capacities.
And there was another analogy in the sources, the ocean and a glass of water.
Oh yeah, this one really grounds it.
So if you wade into the Pacific Ocean, submerge a glass, fill it with water, and then drive that glass 1,000 miles inland to a desert, the water in the glass and the water in the ocean are now physically separated by immense distance.
Right, a huge physical gap.
But the chemical composition of the water in the glass is identical to the ocean. The substance hasn't changed at all. Distance does not alter the fundamental reality of what the water is.
And the implication of that for human psychology is staggering.
Mhm.
Because while we are obviously not cosmic deities, we experience echoes of this soul binding on a micro level all the time.
I want you to think about this in your own life. Have you ever had to walk away from a soul-deep connection, a partner, a profound friendship, a mentor?
And you didn't walk away because the love turned toxic or because it faded.
Right, but simply because the brutal logistics of the world timing, a career duty, a family tragedy, demanded that you go in completely different directions.
Society heavily conditions us to view those separations as failures. We look at a relationship that ends in physical distance and we say, well, it didn't work out.
But what if that is a complete misread of the situation? What if it did work out perfectly, but its purpose was never meant to be codified by a shared lease or a marriage certificate?
We torture ourselves grieving these separations because we lack the physical proximity.
But the story of Radha and Krishna suggests that a true soul bond doesn't require a shared zip code to remain entirely valid. Physical distance cannot alter the chemical composition of the love.
That reframing offers immense comfort. But, and there's always a but, it doesn't alleviate the intellectual necessity of understanding the why.
Right. Even if the bond remains intact across distance, why did the universe demand the separation in the first place? Like, why couldn't the supreme leader of the universe just stay in the forest and let someone else handle the dictator?
To answer the cosmic why, we have to pull out the Bhagavad Gita.
Okay, set the scene for the Gita.
So, for context, this is a 700-verse dialogue delivered by Krishna years after he leaves Vrindavan. He is standing in the middle of a battlefield at Kurukshetra, speaking to a warrior named Arjuna.
And Arjuna is not having a good time.
No, Arjuna is having a massive, paralyzing panic attack at the prospect of this catastrophic war. And he basically wants to throw down his weapons, abandon his duty, and retreat to the forest to live a peaceful life. He wants to tap out.
He wants his own Vrindavan.
Exactly. But Krishna essentially tells him, you do not have the luxury of tapping out. And he explains this through a concept called Lokasangraha.
Lokasangraha.
Yes, it is the ultimate manifestation of Dharma. It translates to the maintenance of the world, the holding together of society, and acting specifically for the welfare of the masses rather than your own localized peace.
So it's the grim recognition that human society is an incredibly fragile construct.
Very fragile. It is always one generation of selfishness away from total collapse.
The sources gave an analogy for Lokasangraha that makes the mechanics of this so visually striking. Think about a massive, beautiful skyscraper.
Okay, visualizing a skyscraper.
When we look at a building like that, we admire all the things above ground. We marvel at the glass facade reflecting the sky, the interior design, the penthouses flooded with natural light. That is the aesthetic, visible, hacky part of the structure. But absolutely none of that exists without the foundation.
And where is the foundation?
It is buried deep underground. It is poured concrete living in absolute perpetual darkness. It gets zero sunlight. It gets no fresh air. It receives no aesthetic upgrades, no paint, no praise. Nobody walks into the lobby of a skyscraper and says, my God, the subterranean concrete holding this place up is breathtaking.
No one has ever said that.
Never. The foundation entirely sacrifices its visibility and its aesthetic pleasure to bear the immense, crushing physical weight of the entire structure. And it does it just so that other people can live and work safely in the sunlit rooms above it. That is Lokasangraha.
It's a perfect parallel. And Krishna explains this explicitly to Arjuna in chapter 3 of the Gita, specifically in verses 20 and 21. He points to historical philosopher kings like King Janaka.
Right. Janaka achieves spiritual perfection not by meditating in an isolated cave, but by staying in the world and executing his massive administrative duties.
Yes. And verse 21 is where Krishna lays his own motivations bare. He tells Arjuna, whatever actions great persons perform, common people follow.
And that is the crux of the separation from Radha.
It is. Krishna is operating as the ultimate leader. If he, possessing supreme power, had chosen to abandon his imprisoned parents and ignore a dictator just so he could stay in the forest playing music with his love. The precedent it sets is apocalyptic.
It effectively tells humanity that personal pleasure always supersedes justice. It tells every human being that when the weight of the world gets heavy, you are morally permitted to just drop it and walk away to find your own peace.
Right. If the apex of leadership prioritizes romance over duty, the fragile construct shatters. He couldn't just lecture humanity about duty, he had to physically model the most agonizing sacrifice possible.
He had to be the concrete foundation.
Exactly.
Okay, I hear the ancient logic.
Yeah.
And part of me deeply respects it. But as someone navigating the realities of the modern world, I want to push back on this heavily.
That's good.
Because applying a 1,000-year-old theological framework to everyday human lives without interrogating the dark side of it is dangerous.
Let's really steelman the counter-arguments here. Let's look at the toxicity of duty.
It's a very real concern.
Because the idea of sacrificing your happiness for family duty sounds incredibly noble in the scripture. But how does it actually play out in reality?
Well, historically, it has often played out disastrously. We see this globally. The concept of duty is routinely weaponized to maintain abusive, controlling systems. Think about the generations of people, and this is disproportionately women, who have been pressured to stay in violently abusive marriages, or forced to abandon their education, or forced to cover up family crimes, all under the guise of protecting family honor or fulfilling their Dharma.
It's tragic.
If we blindly celebrate the surrender of personal happiness for the family unit, aren't we just handing abusers a divine vocabulary to trap their victims? Duty cannot just be a polite synonym for enabling abuse.
That is an urgent and necessary critique, and we must draw an absolute razor-sharp distinction here between a genuine call to Dharma and a toxic cultural trap.
How do we separate them?
Well, Dharma fundamentally is the mechanism that upholds cosmic truth and justice. Enduring abuse or covering up a family's toxicity to maintain societal appearances is not locus angraha. That is cowardice masquerading as duty.
Oh, wow. Cowardice masquerading as duty.
Yeah. True Dharma often requires the incredibly painful act of disrupting a toxic family system to protect the vulnerable within it. It requires breaking the cycle, not submitting to it. But you are absolutely correct that cultural manipulators have hijacked the language of duty for centuries.
Okay, let's take that logic a step further. We keep comparing human choices to Krishna's choice.
Yeah.
But there is a massive asymmetry here.
The divine exemption.
Yes. Krishna is omniscient. When he hands Radha the flute and gets on the chariot, he knows with absolute cosmic certainty how the story ends across eternity. He knows the grand design.
Humans do not have that luxury.
We are stumbling around in the dark. When a human walks away from a dream job or the love of their life to take care of a sick parent, they don't have a grand eternal perspective comforting them. They just have a panic attack on their kitchen floor at 2 a.m. wondering if they ruined their life.
Right.
So, is it fair to demand that fragile, mortal humans operate like divine avatars without expecting their psychology to just shatter under the pressure?
The asymmetry is profound, I'll give you that. When we sacrifice, we do it in a terrifying state of vulnerability. We don't have the comfort of guaranteed outcomes. But the philosophical counter to that is that the human soul, while housed in a very fragile, easily traumatized nervous system, is qualitatively identical to the divine.
So the capacity is there.
Yes, the inherent capacity to endure sacrifice for the sake of love is built into our architecture. However, acknowledging the psychological toll is crucial, which brings us to arguably the most formidable counter-argument of all, the mechanics of repression.
Yes. Let's talk about Carl Jung and the concept of the shadow. Because modern clinical psychology presents a very strong case against everything we're discussing.
Jung is essential here.
Jungian psychology argues that if you have a core fundamental desire, say a deep artistic calling or a profound romantic love, and you suppress it just to satisfy a societal expectation of duty, that energy doesn't magically disappear.
The brain doesn't just delete it.
No, it drives it into the subconscious.
It ferments.
It mutates into the shadow. We all know people who sacrificed their true passions for a practical family business or who stayed in a loveless arranged marriage for duty. And over decades, that suppressed desire ferments into a toxic, leaky resentment.
They become bitter, emotionally unavailable partners.
Exactly. Or they become controlling parents who subconsciously punish their children for the sacrifices they made. So doesn't true locus angra, true welfare of the world, require you to have a healed, fulfilled, happy heart first? If you force a sacrifice, Aren't you just bleeding your unresolved resentment all over the exact people you supposedly sacrificed for?
That is the razor's edge of this entire philosophy. And Jung's mechanism of the shadow is incredibly accurate. But here is the vital distinction the ancient texts make. There is a monumental difference between suppressed desire and conscious sacrifice.
Unpack the mechanics of that difference for me.
Okay, so suppression is an act of fear. It is a failure to acknowledge what you truly want. You bury the desire out of shame or guilt, and you pretend it doesn't exist. That unacknowledged energy is what ferments into the shadow.
And conscious sacrifice.
Conscious sacrifice is an act of profound agency. It is looking your desire directly in the eye, fully acknowledging its validity, feeling the absolute devastating grief of its loss, and then actively choosing the higher path anyway. You do not pretend the heavy pack is light. You acknowledge its weight, and you choose to carry it.
That is a staggering distinction. One makes you a victim of circumstance, and the other makes you an active participant in your destiny.
And regarding bleeding resentment onto others, Krishna actually specifically addresses this in the Gita. He warns that executing your duty while remaining deeply attached to your own suffering and ego creates exactly that toxic bitterness. The spiritual goal is to perform the action without being consumed by your own narrative of martyrdom.
Which perfectly transitions us from the theoretical to the empirical. We have debated the theology and the psychology, but let's look at the hard clinical data.
Let's do it.
What does modern science actually observe when humans choose sacrifice over personal joy? Let's look at the neurological difference between happiness and meaning.
This is where it gets really concrete. Because in clinical research, happiness and meaning are not interchangeable synonyms. They're measured as two entirely distinct psychological states, and they often operate in direct opposition to one another.
Happiness, clinically speaking, is defined by getting what you want and feeling good.
Right.
It is the satisfaction of needs and drives. It is an absence of stress and a surplus of pleasure.
It is inherently a taker state.
Yes, a taker state. Meaning, however, is defined by cognitive and emotional connection to something much larger than the self. It is a giver state, and it often involves significant stress, challenge, and discomfort.
And the data reveals a fascinating paradox that completely upends modern cultural advice. Broad psychological studies consistently demonstrate that individuals whose primary driving life goal is the pursuit of pure happiness, those who constantly prioritize their own comfort and actively avoid emotional friction, actually report significantly higher baseline levels of anxiety, depression, and general life dissatisfaction over the long term.
Wait, really? Let that sink in. The aggressive pursuit of happiness is biologically making us more anxious.
Because happiness is a volatile, fleeting emotional state that is entirely contingent on external variables aligning perfectly. If your ultimate goal is to always feel good, your brain is in a constant state of hypervigilance, terrified of losing the temporary things that are currently making you feel good.
It's an exhausting hedonic treadmill.
Precisely. But the data on individuals who pursue meaning tells an entirely different story.
How so?
It is radically different. People whose lives are oriented around meaning, which inherently means taking on heavy responsibilities, enduring stress, making painful compromises, and sacrificing their short-term happiness for a child, a community, or a long-term goal, demonstrate profound levels of life satisfaction.
Even when they're stressed.
Yes. They possess a massive buffer against trauma. They do not always feel good in the present moment, but their nervous system is anchored by the deep conviction that their existence matters to the structure of the world.
And researchers didn't just rely on surveys for this, right? They put people in fMRI machines to look at the brain's actual wiring. And the neurobiology behind this is arguably the most mind-blowing part of the deep dive.
It's incredible.
What physically happens in the human brain when a person makes a conscious choice to sacrifice their personal reward for the benefit of the group?
The scan data reveals a brilliant evolutionary mechanism. When we make a choice rooted in sacrifice for our tribe, a specific region of the brain called the temporoparietal junction activates with intense electrical signaling.
The temporoparietal junction, TPJ for short, what is its primary function?
It is the neurological hub for empathy, perspective-taking, and our spatial sense of interconnectedness with other human beings. But the real magic happens in the cascading effect. When a TPJ lights up during an act of sacrifice, it sends aggressive inhibitory signals directly to the amygdala.
And the amygdala is the brain's alarm system. It's the fear center, the anxiety generator, the processor of emotional and physical pain.
Exactly. The part of the brain that connects you to the collective group literally suppresses the part of the brain that generates your personal anxiety and fear.
That is wild.
From an evolutionary biology standpoint, A tribe could not survive if every individual prioritized their own safety above the group. The tribe needed individuals willing to endure pain, fight off predators, or starve so the children could eat. So human neurology evolved a mechanism to help us endure the pain of Dharma.
The brain doses us with a kind of neurological anesthetic.
Yes. Quieting our personal fears so long as we deeply believe our sacrifice is serving the survival of the people we love.
Think about the absolute tragedy of our modern culture of hyper-individualism in light of that neurobiology. We are constantly preached to by society to put ourselves first, to cut off any relationship that requires difficult compromise, to seek isolated personal joy.
And look at the results.
As a society, our anxiety and depression rates are off the charts. We are literally fighting a war against our own neurology. We have a brain that is hardwired to find chemical peace through interconnected sacrifice, and we are forcing it to operate in total selfish isolation. The brain is short-circuiting.
We have culturally pathologized the very acts of sacrifice that our biology relies upon to generate a stable sense of purpose.
Okay, before we move into the modern practical application of all this neuroscience and philosophy, there is a hidden layer in the text that we absolutely have to uncover. The sources provide some deep lore, some fascinating Easter eggs that reframe the timeline of this entire narrative.
The textual history of the Vedic narratives is as complex and layered as the philosophical concepts themselves.
The first hidden detail blew my mind. Radha is entirely absent from the Bhagavad Gita.
Completely absent.
And she is missing from the massive epic, the Mahabharata, entirely. The name Radha does not appear. How can the ultimate symbol of love be missing from the foundational text?
Her specific narrative and the intimate details of their relationship are deeply elaborated in later texts, primarily the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Gita Govinda.
But why intentionally hide her from the primary texts initially?
Theologians and scholars point to a brilliant strategy of moral pedagogy. You have to consider the audience. The Mahabharata and the Gita were texts delivered to a society that was politically and morally fracturing.
They were in crisis.
Yes, the general public urgently needed to establish a baseline of strict foundational rules: basic justice, honor, duty, and right action dharma.
And Radha's love is not that.
The love between Radha and Krishna is described as so ecstatic, so utterly consuming, that it transcends and often breaks all societal rules and conventions. It is the absolute pinnacle of spiritual intimacy. If you introduce supreme, rule-breaking, transcendent love to a society that hasn't even mastered basic moral decency yet, they will weaponize it.
They'll just use it as an excuse to do whatever they want.
They will misinterpret it as a divine excuse for reckless, selfish, destructive behavior. The teachers had to pour the concrete foundation of strict duty before they could reveal the pinnacle of transcendent love.
That is profound. You have to master the rules of the system before you earn the right to transcend them.
Exactly.
The second piece of deep lore is the prequel to the separation. The texts reveal that Krishna and Radha's earthly separation wasn't just a random tragedy of war. It was preordained by a curse.
Yes, the narrative asserts that in the spiritual realm, prior to their earthly incarnation, a devotee named Sridharma laid a curse upon them, mandating that they endure a 100-year separation in the material world.
But why would the cosmic architecture allow such a devastating curse? What is the functional purpose of forcing the ultimate lovers to be apart?
To physically demonstrate a concept known as Vipralambha Pava,
Vipralambha Pava,
which translates to the ecstasy of love and separation. In the theology of devotion, meeting and being physically present with the one you love is beautiful and fulfilling, but it is not the ceiling.
There's a higher level.
The absolute highest, most purifying, most intense state of the soul is experienced in the searing longing, the sustained devotion, and the unyielding loyalty of separation. The curse was a necessary mechanism to show humanity what supreme love actually looks like when it is tested by the impossible weight of distance and time.
The highest love is the love that survives the silence. That is haunting.
It really is.
And the final piece of context from the lore is the concept of ashramas. This fundamentally changes how we view the timeline of our sacrifices.
Right. The Vedic system does not view human life as a monolithic block where you are expected to do everything at once. It organizes life into distinct progressive stages called ashramas.
Which is the exact opposite of modern pressure. Today, society expects you to perfectly execute your karma and your dharma simultaneously. Like you are supposed to have the peak career, the perfect romantic soulmate, be incredibly physically fit, attain spiritual enlightenment, and be a pillar of your community all by the time you are 35.
It is a recipe for a nervous breakdown.
A complete breakdown.
The ancient system recognized the psychological impossibility of that.
Mm.
There is a stage dedicated purely to student life and learning. There is a stage specifically designated for the pursuit of wealth, family, and the fulfillment of desires, comma. There is a stage where you transition into strict societal duty and leadership. And finally, a stage for total renunciation and spiritual focus.
This changes the entire emotional texture of sacrifice. What feels like a brutal, agonizing, life-ending sacrifice at age 30, giving up a wild, adventurous dream to care for a sick child, for example, might not be the permanent death of yourself.
It's just a shift.
Exactly. If you view it through the lens of ashramas, it is simply a natural transition into a new stage of spiritual maturity. You aren't losing your life. You are just turning the page to a heavier, more meaningful chapter.
Contextualizing our struggles within the long arc of a complete lifetime dramatically reduces the immediate panic of a difficult choice.
So let's take Krishna, Radha, the temporoparietal junction, and the ashramas, and bring them directly into a modern living room. We have a highly relatable case study from the sources that grounds all of this high-level philosophy into an everyday reality. Let's look at the case of the quiet sacrifice.
This is a scenario that millions of professionals face in varying degrees. It strips away the mythology to reveal the bare psychology.
Imagine a highly skilled engineer. They have spent a decade grinding, and they finally receive an incredible, life-altering offer. A dream job in a vibrant, fast-paced foreign tech hub. It pays exceptionally well, it aligns perfectly with their passions, and it is their personal Vrindavan. The sunlit path is paved.
And to make the comma even more intoxicating, during a visit to this new city, they meet someone.
A rare, profound, undeniable romantic connection. The kind of connection that makes the rest of the world blur. Everything is aligning for their ultimate personal happiness.
The ego's narrative is entirely fulfilled, but the scale of human existence always demands balance.
Right, because back in their hometown, reality is collapsing. The family business, the unglamorous blue-collar infrastructure that their parents built from nothing, the business that paid for the engineer's degree, is on the verge of bankruptcy. And those aging parents are simultaneously facing severe cascading health crises. They are drowning.
The engineer is now standing at the crossroads in the forest, staring down the steep path.
And the modern cultural algorithm is screaming at them with absolute certainty. Take the job, go abroad, live your truth. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You only get one life. You owe it to yourself to be happy.
But the engineer engages their temporoparietal junction. They look past the localized desires of the ego and observe the interconnected web of their lineage. They calculate the blast radius of their absence.
And they make the choice. They decline the dream job. They have the agonizing, heart-shattering conversation and walk away from that profound soul connection. They pack up their life, move back to the small hometown, take over the struggling family infrastructure, and step into the crushing, unglamorous mantle of duty.
The sources describe the psychological aftermath with brutal honesty. The first few years are not a noble cinematic montage. They are grueling.
It's just hard.
So hard. The engineers deep in mourning for the life they had to execute. There is exhaustion, there is grief, and there's a profound deficit of happiness as society defines it.
Then we transport the narrative 10 years into the future. A decade has passed. The engineer is sitting at a dinner table. Across from them are their parents. The parents are safe. Their health is stabilized. Their dignity is intact. And the family business has survived.
And sitting there, eating a quiet, mundane dinner, a profound realization washes over the engineer.
The temporary, glittering, sensory happiness of that life abroad could never, ever approach the deep, structural, bone-level peace they feel in this exact moment.
Because they realize they successfully became the foundation. They sacrificed their visibility, their aesthetic joy, and their personal paradise to bear the weight of the structure, ensuring their family did not collapse.
And what about the soul connection they walked away from? It didn't ferment into a toxic shadow. Because it was a conscious sacrifice, that love became the internal fuel. It became the quiet, secret strength that powered them through those brutal years.
It's beautiful.
Think about the quiet pillars in your own life. Look at where you are sitting right now, the education you possess, the basic safety you enjoy. Who in your lineage, who in your history gave up their Vrindavan so that you could be here today? Someone in your past carried a 100-pound pack so that you could walk on a paved road.
Recognizing the sacrifices that built your present reality is a profoundly humbling experience, and it radically shifts how we approach our own obligations.
So how do we practically equip ourselves to handle our own crossroads when the heavy pack is handed to us? The sources offer some incredibly actionable takeaways. Takeaway number one is the Dharma versus desire audit.
This is a highly effective cognitive behavioral tool. It's designed to force the brain out of the immediate, localized panic of a difficult decision.
It is a physical paper exercise. You draw a line down the middle of a page. On the left side, you write down your comma, the sunlit path, and you ask a ruthlessly simple question. If I follow my personal desire, who benefits?
And the answer is almost exclusively just one person. You.
Right. Then, on the right side, you write down your Dharma, the heavy pack, and you ask, if I follow the bigger picture, who benefits and who suffers?
You are forcing your brain to visualize the blast radius of your choices. When you physically write down the names of the people whose lives will be fundamentally destabilized if you shirk your duty, it forces the perspective shift from the isolated ego to the interconnected soul.
It actively engages the empathy centers of the brain we discussed earlier.
Exactly.
Takeaway number two is redefining soul connections. This circles back to the metaphysics of Krishna and Radha. If you have had to walk away from someone you deeply, genuinely loved because the logistics of duty, timing, or family demanded it, you have to stop labeling that separation as a failure.
The vocabulary of failure incorrectly implies that the bond was invalid simply because it did not culminate in an earthly, societal contract.
Honor the love by letting the memory of it make you a better person. Let it make you kinder, more patient, and more resilient in the life you are currently living. If the connection was authentic, it is etched into your soul. You do not need physical proximity to validate it. Let it be the fuel, not the anchor.
And finally, takeaway number 3 is the 10-year meaning test.
When the sheer pain of the sacrifice feels absolutely unbearable in the present moment, you have to aggressively stretch your timeline. You ask yourself, will the joy of this selfish choice truly matter to my character in 10 years? And conversely, will the acute pain of this sacrifice matter in 10 years?
We constantly evaluate happiness in the immediate present, which is why it is such a volatile metric. But meaning can only be accurately evaluated over the span of a lifetime. You must project yourself into the future and choose the path that you will be proud of when you look back a decade from now, sitting at that dinner table.
As we wrap up this deep dive, there are some incredibly difficult open questions raised by the sources that we do not have easy answers for, and we want to bounce them to you to ponder. First, how do you truly distinguish between a noble call to Dharma and simply being a coward who is terrified to take a risk and pursue what they actually want?
Sometimes we hide behind the excuse of duty simply because we are afraid of failing in our dreams.
Exactly.
It requires a level of ruthless self-honesty that is very difficult to achieve. You have to know the difference between carrying a heavy pack for the survival of others and just refusing to walk because you are paralyzed by the unknown.
Second, when we sacrifice our personal joy to maintain our family system, do we actually make them happy, or do we just pass the crushing burden of sacrifice down to the next generation? Does anyone in the lineage ever get to actually enjoy the sunlit path, or are we all just internally paying the suffering forward?
That touches on the deeply cyclical nature of generational trauma and obligation. At some point, the subterranean foundation must support a house where a subsequent generation is actually permitted to enjoy the sunlight. Otherwise, the building serves no purpose.
And finally, can you ever find your way back to your personal Vrindavan? Once you pick up the heavy mantle of leadership and step onto the battlefield, can you ever go back to the forest and play the flute again?
Perhaps you cannot return to the exact same flute, played in the exact same way. But the deep structural meaning generated by your sacrifice often births a new, much more profound kind of joy that was entirely inaccessible to you before you carried the pack.
To summarize this immense emotional and philosophical journey, acknowledging that walking away from your personal happiness for the sake of meaning is tough. It is perhaps the heaviest, most agonizing burden a human being can carry. But it is also, without a shadow of a doubt, the most beautiful. It is the ultimate, undeniable expression of love.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you navigate your own crossroads. We talked about Krishna leaving his flute and the engineer sitting at the table 10 years later. But frame your own sacrifices in this light. If physical distance and societal labels truly cannot break a soul bond, and if our quiet, unseen, unglamorous sacrifices are what actually uphold the fragile fabric of the world, what if the people we think we have lost to duty are actually the ones silently powering our greatest achievements from afar?
Wow.
What if the love we leave behind in our own personal Vrindavan is the exact indispensable fuel required to save our own little corner of the world?
What a profound way to look at it. Thank you for joining us on this journey today. As you step back out into the world, facing your own crossroads and looking at your own heavy packs, we encourage you to evaluate your choices not just through the lens of fleeting, immediate happiness, but through the enduring lens of meaning. And the next time you find yourself instinctively asking, does this make me happy? Maybe pause, take a breath, and ask instead, does this make me the foundation? Until next time.